Saint Augustine commentary on the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verse 13 to 27, Tractatus 113. After that, his persecutors had, through the treason of Judas, taken and bound the Lord, who loved us and gave himself for us, and whom the Father spared not, but gave him up for us all. Romans chapter 8, verse 32. That we may understand that there was no praise due to Judas for the usefulness of his treachery, but damnation for the willfulness of his wickedness. They led him, as John the Evangelist tells us, to Annas first, nor does he withhold the reason for so doing, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was the high priest that same year. Now Caiaphas was he says, who gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And properly enough, Matthew, when wishing to say the same in fewer words, tells us that he was led to Caiaphas. Matthew chapter 26, verse 57. For he was also taken in the first place to Annas, simply because he was his father-in-law, and where we have only to understand that such was the very thing that Caiaphas wished to be done. But Jesus was followed, he says, by Simon Peter and another disciple. Who that other disciple is, we can't affirm with confidence, because it is left unnoticed here. But it is in this way that John usually refers to himself, with the addition, whom Jesus loved. Chapter 13, verse 23, chapter 19, verse 26. Perhaps, therefore, it is he also in the present case, but whoever it is, let us look at what follows. And that disciple, he says, was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, who was known unto the high priest, and spoke unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Then says the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, Are you also one of this man's disciples? He says, I am not. Lo, the pillar of greatest strength has at a single breath of air trembled to its foundations. Where is now all that boldness of the promiser, and his overweening confidence in himself beforehand? What now of those words when he said, Why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake. Chapter 13, verse 37. Is this the way to follow the Master, to deny his own discipleship? Is it thus that one's life is laid down for the Lord, when one is frightened at a maid servant's voice, lest it should compel us to the sacrifice? But what wonder if God foretold what was true, and man presumptuously imagined what was false? Assuredly, in this denial of the Apostle Peter, which had now entered on its first stage, we ought to take notice that not only is Christ denied by one who says that he is not Christ, but by him also who, while really a Christian, himself denies that he is so. For the Lord said not to Peter, you shall deny that you are my disciple, but you shall deny me. Matthew chapter 26, verse 34. Him therefore he denied, when he denied that he was his disciple. And what else did such a form of denial imply but that of his own Christianity? For although the disciples of Christ were not yet called by such a name, because it was after his ascension in Antioch first that the disciples began to be called Christians. Acts chapter 11, verse 26. Yet the thing itself that afterwards assumed such a name already existed. Those who were afterwards called Christians were already disciples, and this common name, like the common faith, they transmitted to their posterity. He, therefore, who denied that he was Christ's disciple, denied the reality of the thing, of which the being called a Christian was only the name. How many afterwards, not to speak of old men and women, whose satiated feeling as regards the present life might more easily enable them to brave death for the confession of Christ, and not merely the youth of both sexes, when of an age at which the exercise of fortitude seems to be fairly required, but even boys and girls could do, even as an innumerable company of holy martyrs, with brave hearts, and by a violent death entered the kingdom of heaven. What at that moment he was unable to do, who received the keys of that kingdom. Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. It is here we see why it was said, "Let these go their way," when he who has redeemed us by his own blood gave himself for us, that the saying which he spoke might be fulfilled, "Of those whom you have given me, I have lost none." For assuredly, had Peter gone hence after denying the Christ, what else would have awaited him but destruction? And the servants and officers stood beside the fire of burning coals, for it was cold, and warmed themselves. Though it was not winter, it was cold, which is sometimes wont to be the case even at the vernal equinox. And Peter was standing with them and warming himself. The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. Jesus answered him, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, whither all the Jews resort, and in secret have I said nothing. Why ask you me? Ask those who heard me what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said." A question occurs that ought not to be passed over. How it is that the Lord Jesus said, "I spoke openly to the world," and in particular that which he afterwards added, "In secret have I said nothing." Did he not, even in that latest discourse which he delivered to the disciples after supper, say to them, "These things have I spoken unto you in Proverbs, but the hour comes when I shall no more speak unto you in Proverbs, but I shall show you plainly of my Father." Chapter 16, verse 25. If then he spoke not openly even to the more intimate company of his disciples, but gave the promise of a time when he would speak openly, how was it that he spoke openly to the world? And still further, as is also testified on the authority of the other evangelists, to those who were truly his own, In comparison with others who were not his disciples, he certainly spoke with much greater plainness when he was alone with them at a distance from the multitudes. For then he unfolded to them the parables which he had uttered in obscure terms to others. What then is the meaning of the words, "I spoke openly to the world," as if he had said, "There were many that heard me"? And that word openly was in a certain sense openly, in another sense not openly. It was openly because many heard him, and again it was not openly because they did not understand him. And even what he spoke to his disciples apart, he certainly spoke not in secret. For who speaks in secret that speaks before so many persons, as it is written, "At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established"? Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15.